A traveler sheltering under the temple eaves watched him practice one afternoon, with an expression caught between curiosity and alarm. The man finally called out, his voice competing with the sound of water striking stone, and asked why he was training in such weather when any reasonable man would wait for sun. Jin paused. He considered the traveler honestly. "The storm does not ask what I prefer," he said. "So I have stopped asking the storm." The traveler stared. He pulled his robe tighter and said nothing more. There were nights, and this must be said honestly, because without these nights the story becomes legend rather than truth. There were nights when he was not certain. Not uncertain of who he was, but uncertain of what he could endure. He had chosen a harder road than most. He understood that. He did not pretend the road was easy, or that his body felt no exhaustion, or that his spirit felt no weight. There were evenings when he sat in his small, sparsely furnished room and felt the loneliness settle into his bones like the cold. Evenings when he questioned whether the sacrifices he had chosen over years of practice had built anything that mattered. Evenings when he heard distant laughter from the village below and felt the quiet pull of the ordinary life he had stepped away from. A lantern burned on the low table before him. Small, steady, surrounded by darkness on all sides. He watched it without meaning to teach himself anything. But the lantern taught him anyway. It did not require the darkness to be less dark. It did not protest the wind coming through the gaps in the paper walls. It simply continued to burn with whatever it had, without drama, without hesitation, without waiting for better conditions. He rose before dawn the next morning, as he had every morning before and would every morning after. 5 years passed, then 10. The men who had mocked him grew older, as men do. Some grew fat on comfort, and found that comfort taken without discipline became a kind of prison. Kenji, generous, pleasure-seeking Kenji, had pursued every ease available to him and found at 50 that his body had become unreliable and his spirit had become restless. The things he had sought for their immediate warmth had left him strangely cold in the places that mattered. He sat in the village square one afternoon watching Jin return from the mountain, older now, but composed in a way that seemed to belong to a different category of aging, and something in Kenji's chest moved in a way he could not quite name. Daisuke the farmer, who had crossed the road to avoid him, had passed through a difficult winter that took his harvest and tested everything he thought he knew about endurance. It was only then, walking a road stripped of comfort, genuinely uncertain whether he would recover, that he began to understand what he had watched Jin doing all those years on the cold mountain. Not obsession, not madness, practice. The accumulation of a strength that could not be borrowed in the moment of need, but had to be built long before the need arrived. The younger people in the village, those who had grown up watching the lone figure on the mountain in all weather, had begun, quietly, to speak of him differently. Not with ridicule, with something closer to reverence they did not entirely understand yet. They pointed him out to their children. He rises before the sun, they said, as if this were itself a kind of marvel. He was older now. The morning came more slowly, or perhaps he simply noticed it more. The mist still covered the mountain valleys before sunrise. The training ground was still empty except for him. His hands were still scarred, more so now, layered scar upon scar in the way that speaks not of damage, but of dedication. He stood in the pale gray light before the dawn arrived, and he breathed and he was still. He had not become invincible. That was not the point, and had never been the point. He had lost things along the way that mattered to him. He had made choices that cost him. He had known years of genuine doubt and genuine loneliness, and the particular grief of watching the world choose comfort while he chose otherwise. But he had also built something. Not a reputation, not a title, something quieter and more durable than either. He had built a self that he could trust, a self that did not shatter when circumstances grew difficult, did not dissolve when people withdrew their approval, did not panic when storms arrived, and did not grow arrogant when storms passed. He had become, through years of unglamorous daily practice, the person who remained. A blade sharpened one stroke at a time. A river that had worn its stone path not by force, but by showing up, always in the same place with the same patient pressure. A tree that had stood through every winter, not because no winter was hard, but because its roots had gone deep enough that hard winters no longer determined its fate. The sun rose. The mist began to lift from the valleys. The village below began its morning sounds, the ordinary music of people waking into their ordinary lives. He raised his blade. He began. No one was watching. That had always been exactly the point. Years later, the people who had called him crazy would use the only word they had left: extraordinary. But he had not become extraordinary by becoming someone else. He had become extraordinary by refusing, in 10,000 small and painful moments, to become less than himself. The madness they had seen was simply discipline they had not yet suffered enough to understand. And in the end, the greatest distance a person ever travels is the one between who they are and who they are capable of becoming. A road walked alone, before dawn in the cold, when no one is watching and everything in you wants to stop.